Welcome to our new Recipes for Success podcast. I'm the host and the CEO here at Zupa, Ollie Brand. Now, we've created this podcast to get great minds from the hospitality community to share information that could benefit others within the sector, including ourselves. Now, our guest today is the CEO of Tweakd, Alex Marsh. Now, he started his career in corporate law, but then his passion for food and drink came through and he secured a job at Cadbury Schweppes. And then he got onto the Mitchell & Butlers graduate scheme before joining Loungers as the central operations team, which grew the business from 9 to 130 sites. He then moved into the technology side of the sector, with becoming the COO of Tenkites, which is now part of Nutritics. But then from his time there, he missed the operational side and then opened his own consultancy called Three Daddies. And then since then, he found himself in the position as CEO at Tweakd, which is a performance food company. And we have a great discussion that we could all learn from. So sit back and enjoy. Alex, welcome to the Recipes for Success podcast. It's lovely to have you. I'd normally like to kick off the podcast by kind of getting a background to the person and looking at your background. You know, you were going into corporate law and then you went into hospitality, and what got you into hospitality and got you that passion around food and drink?
I suspect, like a lot of people, as soon as I was 18 years old, I went straight up to the best local pub in my village and got a job behind the bar, and kind of fell in love with it straight away because this was a proper pub. It was where everyone went. The landlord was your classic landlord, as in kind of spent most of service leaning on the end of the bar, drinking copious amounts of Heineken because it was only like 3.5% then, so you kind of could, and smoking pack upon pack of Regals, and watching everything like a hawk. And if there was, this is in Manchester by the way, so it was Boddington's pub. If you served anything less than the regulation dog collar amount of head on your pint, there were serious problems. And it was just a brilliant pub. And being a good barman, I think you're kind of everything. You are the agony aunt, you're the enforcer, you're the arbiter of many an argument, and also, of course, serving absolutely perfect every time pints of bitter. And it was great fun. And doing this aged 18, when I was finishing off school, about to go to university, I kind of fell in love with it. And I spent most of my time, probably far more time than I should have done, behind the bar up there, probably instead of finalising things for my A-levels, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. And then again at university, paid my way through university by working at the local pub there. And at that point intended, as I suspect many don't, to continue working in pubs and all the rest of it. It was just a way of paying the bills. But then having... at the same time, I'd been doing work experience at commercial law firms, barristers' chambers, because it had always sort of been predetermined by my parents, if I'm honest, that law was a respectable career. So went down that route, and my plan was to do history degree, CPE, and then had an offer of a training contract with a very good commercial law firm, and kind of got to it and thought, I don't want to do this, actually. This isn't me, this isn't what I want to do. And so decided at the very last minute not to go down the training contract with the commercial law firm, which kind of threw everything into disarray, as you might imagine. My parents, I suspect, are still mildly irritated about it all. And I suspect even now still see me as really just a glorified barman. But actually, this led to this throwaway conversation with my dad, which he probably doesn't remember. And it saying in exasperation, well, what are you actually passionate about? And saying, well, food and drink, but I don't think I can do that as a job, can I? And he went, well, go and have a look. So I literally went and had a look in the, the Sunday Times or the FT 100 Best Employers list. And the top employers at the time in hospitality were Whitbread PLC and Mitchells & Butlers. So I went and got myself on the graduate traineeship with M&B. This is after I'd been working for Cadbury Schweppes for a little while. Again, kind of fresh out of university, unsure what I wanted to do. Found myself there, enjoyed it, but at the time Cadbury Schweppes was quite big, quite political, and it was less about the product. It was more about the sort of the ladder. So went and joined M&B, got on the graduate traineeship, which at the time was like sort of hen's teeth. It was, for every 100 applicants, you one guy getting in. So it was pretty cutthroat. And then at the end of it, they said, okay, what do you want to do? There were 2 routes through. And I said, well, the operational route sounds fun, actually. Can I do that? And they literally they gave you a list of like 3,500 sites, dumped it down in front of you, went, pick one. And so I got to toddle all around the country, having a look at all these amazing pubs, Nicholson's and Castle and all of those brands, and then finally walked into one which was at the time this brand new concept they'd come up with, which was called Project Orange, then became Project S, and I think is now Premium Country Dining or something. It's their absolute flagship country gastropubs. And went, I really like this one. They went, okay, you're an assistant manager there. Okay, and that's how I started, and fast tracked through, and within 6 months was opening pubs for Mitchells and Butlers, and having an absolutely lovely time, and that's really where it started, to be honest. So just, yeah, like many, wasn't necessarily planned, but completely fell in love with it, and it gets in the blood, which is why even when I thought I'd escaped and gone and helped to run a software company, you kind of get dragged back into it because it's addictive, I think, and it's
What's the thing that makes you feel so passionately about it? Because you could absolutely feel it coming through.
I mean, I think you've got to be sort of slightly a little bit broken as a human being to fall completely for hospitality, because it requires you to put others before yourself always, whether it be your customers or your staff. But in order to do it really, really well, I honestly feel you've got to do that. And this almost sort of addiction to wanting to ensure that everyone who walks through the doors of your business, whatever state they're in when they arrive, you're going to make damn certain that when they leave, they're feeling a bit better about themselves and about their day. And if you can do that, that's a bit of an art, and it's incredibly satisfying. And at the same time, you've got all of these staff in the kitchen and front of house who are often themselves quite broken people, actually, because hospitality attracts quite broken people. You get people with addictions, you get people who don't know what to do with themselves. And actually, the opportunity to be able to take those people and help and coach and mould and support is incredibly satisfying. And I think, it becomes something that is very easy to fall for.
Definitely. And so as you've developed into, you've kind of scaled and grown with businesses, and you've done some incredible things in the sector. So taking a step back and looking at the wider sector and what you're seeing at the moment, because you've done it, you've gone through, you've been an operator, you've been in the technology side as well, you're now in the consultancy arena. What are the kind of macro challenges that you're seeing?
I think it's easy for us all to focus on the big headline things, and it's Brexit, it's Ukraine, it's food costs, it's staff shortages. But I think in doing so, it's very easy to forget that the industry has been on the receiving end of kind of death by 1,000 cuts for several years now. We've been seeing gradual increasing in staff costs, and increasing legislation covering what staff can and cannot do, how they can and cannot do it. You've also seen apprenticeship levies and all of these little things just sort of nibbling away. You've seen sugar tax. You've got all of these teeny tiny little things which have been mounting for kind of 5 to 10 years now, as well as legislative burden in terms of you've got to declare your allergens, you've got to declare calories, you've got to, if you've got a sandwich shop, you've got to put ingredients down on things. Each of which, taken in isolation, doesn't sound like a lot, does it? But actually you throw it all together, and all of a sudden you take an industry which has historically always been quite a complex, multifaceted type of business to run. It's challenging. It's a lot more challenging than people realise, because there's so much to it. You've got man management, you've got product management, you've got to manage customers all the time in a big, complex business which is full of risk. So it's a really tricky business to manage, and to manage well. But at the same time, the government's putting all these things in place. And at the same time, you've got rents going up, you've got rates, which have been an absolute nightmare. And a lot of these beautiful old pubs that you've got up and down the country, which are so such favourites with locals. They've got these massive gardens, massive play areas, massive car parks, all of which are rateable. So, it's a really tough gig. And you throw into that sort of insidious continuing pressure such massive curveballs like Brexit, where all of a sudden all of the wonderful guys that we've had from Eastern Europe in particular, who've been the absolute bedrock of our industry, suddenly made to feel like they don't belong, they're not wanted, combined with the food cost escalation that we've seen, partially due to Ukraine, but actually that was going on before that anyway, and it's been enhanced by Brexit as well. That's hugely challenging, and that's the sort of combination of things where it only takes one little thing for people to say, I'm not doing this anymore. And the energy crisis, I think, has been that straw that's breaking the camel's back left, right and centre, because the number of operators I see who say, well, the energy bill is the little profit that I had. It's gone now. So now I am trading at either a loss or I might be just breaking even. No one's making, at least not a lot of operators are making a profit anymore. Certainly not in the pub sector. It's incredibly difficult. So, yeah, the macro challenges, I think, are really just it's a continuation of stuff that's been going on. And I think there's only so many times as an operator you can be kicked before you just say, I can't do this anymore. And I see... I've seen a number of people who I respect massively. One guy in particular comes to mind, a chef I used to work with, who is Savoy trained under Anton Edelman. He's the best head chef I've ever had the privilege of working with. Absolutely stunningly good. He's worked as a group exec chef. This is a guy who is top of his field. He knows everything there is to know. He's just retrained as an HGV driver because he gets better pay. He works better hours, and he's getting on a little bit. He's got problems with his ankles, as a lot of chefs do. So now he drives a lorry. But isn't that
shocking?
Isn't that sad? This is a guy who's absolutely at the pinnacle of his career, and now he's driving a lorry. Because as an industry, we've not shielded people, I think, from those pressures, and the governments have successively just taken little bites out of the industry until eventually it becomes unsustainable, which is tragic.
I think summarise it as 1,000 cuts is perfect, and seeing it across other sectors as well at the moment. The slippery slope is because the challenges that we see across our customers are definitely cost, the impact of cost, people shortages.
Yep.
Things like the strikes going on, that's also having an impact.
Massively.
You work more in a retail environment, right? You with retail hospitality operations like restaurants and bars and...
Predominantly, although we're starting to see a shift and we're starting to do more work with dark kitchens and virtual brands and things like that. So the non-traditional bricks and mortar, simply out of necessity, because people are having to be more adaptable, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, can we jump into that a little bit? Because, what kind of innovations are you seeing in terms of the operating models and dark kitchens, CPUs? We've seen stuff.
The dark kitchens is an interesting one because we were seeing it to a much greater degree, I think, during lockdown, where you were seeing. I remember dealing with the restaurant group who were a customer of mine when I was at Ten Kites, and they'd already started to take sites. Particularly, they had sort of out of town sites, like the Frankies and Bennies and the Chiquitos, in retail parks. Where they were seeing reduced footfall. So they were, I think, quite sensibly saying, well, how can we actually maximise the revenue into these businesses where we're already paying for the site, the rates, etc., etc. So they were creating these virtual brands that they were then selling through Deliveroo, Uber Eats, what's the first? Just Eat, and doing okay to a degree. But again, it was this sort of technical difficulty because some of their sites, they were having 3 or 4 brands sold through 3 or 4 channels, and you go in, there'd be like 9 to 12 tablets in a row, all churning out tickets, and a slightly distraught looking chef kind of turning around going, I think, which brand is that? Get that stick, okay. And it was hard, and you kind of felt for them. So I'm now seeing more in the way of businesses which are saying, right, okay, I've got this site. I don't want to trade it to the public at the moment because it is not. It's cost prohibitive. I don't actually want to have to turn the lights on a lot. So what's the most effective way? Well, okay, I can trade it through Deliveroo by just opening from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till midnight, 6 days a week. that works. I can staff that. I can keep the lights running. That's okay. I can do it with 3 or 4 different brands which are already established, and that kind of works. It's a bit of a sort of, it's covering the costs, so it's kind of out of necessity and out of desperation. I think the margins are still very, very tight, because if you're a lone operator, the margins that you pay to the likes of Deliveroo, you're nudging 35 to 39%, and that's big. And then you can do it other ways through sort of franchise models. But either way, you're paying your cut, whether it's to Deliveroo or the franchise operators. So I think there are some who are really trying to create their own brands, trying to create a bit of bulk purchasing power so that you can go back to the likes of Deliveroo with a bit of negotiating capability. And I think that's going to be quite interesting, because I think as we, on the one hand, see, unfortunately, a lot of these bricks and mortar locations closing, you're probably going to see a lot more of these virtual brands coming through and establishing a bit of a name for themselves, because some of them are really cool. I mean, they're these very interesting sort of almost like street food style businesses, but that you can get to your door. And of course, because they're being developed purely for delivery, they can get the issues that traditionally plagued the early adopters of Deliveroo, the restaurant operators, who were basically taking what was a dish designed to be eaten in person at that location, and then they were shoving it in a box, and you were getting it at your door half an hour later, lukewarm and a bit flaccid. Whereas these new brands, they're able to actually develop it properly, so that it's optimized for delivery. So the packaging is right, the concept's exactly nailed. So I think that can be quite exciting. It's still early days, and I think a lot of the guys we're working with, they need the support on the tech, because if you get the tech right, then you can make it really, really viable. If you get the tech wrong, or you don't get the process right, it's a very hard way of making a living, I think, which is why we're stitching together all of these complete integrated end-to-end solutions, so the order comes through for whichever brand, it goes through to an automated labelling system which automatically knows exactly which brand it is. It gets printed out, so you get a label per menu item with the correct logo on it, with the correct allergens, with the name of the customer, with maybe a QR code so you can give some feedback or you can reorder or whatever. You do it right, you can look really, really slick. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into the technology part. I think just taking a step back, because it's been amazing how this has come through, and I think the pandemic was kind of a first wave of the technical transformation, but also trying to plug the gap of the people shortages, and the sort of the issue with going to work for Parcel Force or for courier service or Amazon or these big technology companies, which really are the true enemy of the hospitality staff shortages. And I think just trying to understand a bit better, or understand a bit more around methods of retention and ways to, because people will keep going out. Nothing's going to stop the British person from going to the pub to have a pint, and that in-person service is fundamental.
Absolutely.
And so, what are your thoughts towards ways of that the places can sort of retain staff and incentivise them to?
I think there's 2 elements predominantly, and this is a bit of a personal bugbear of mine, because I think the problem starts with the perception of hospitality in Britain in terms of the British public. I think there is a perception in Britain that if you work in service, it is somehow menial, and you are somehow therefore less than. And I think it stems from the whole sort of empire and Britons never, never will be slaves sort of thing. Whereas if you go to Spain, if you go to Italy, France, Switzerland in particular, it is seen as a profession, and you get people who are career waiters. If you go to Switzerland, you go to an academy and you spend months learning before you are ever let loose on a real living, breathing customer. And that's the right way of doing it. And so you get 55, 60-year-old waiters who are unbelievably good at what they do, and they know everything. And they have their regulars, and the service, the hospitality is impeccable because they treat it like a profession. Whereas, as the British public, we don't allow space for that to flourish, I don't think, because we don't give it the respect it deserves. And I think that comes from government. I think that comes from all of us, actually. We're all complicit in this in terms of the ways in which people sort of almost speak down to you. I remember running a restaurant just outside London with a couple of degrees under my belt and being talked down to. You know, here this is a business I had part shares in, so I'm an owner of a business, very successful. I'm, without wishing to sound arrogant, pretty well educated, but I'm being spoken down to by people because there is a perception that if I'm taking an order at a table in a restaurant, then I'm just a waiter. I'm just serving. Right, that's menial. And that is incredibly damaging. And I think as long as that perception is maintained and it's a cultural attitude, it's going to be incredibly difficult to attract the best quality people to the industry. Because why would you want to take that, right? Why would you want to take that level of disrespect? And then coupled with the second element, which is that I think there needs to be a greater degree of professionalisation within the industry. Because I think for quite a long time it has been the preserve of people who do it because they like food, or they've been to restaurants, they've made a bit of money elsewhere, and they're going to open a pub, they're going to open a restaurant. It's not treated with respect in terms of a professional endeavour. So people go into it, they do it badly, or they do it well out of luck, out of fluke. But it's not really treated with professionalism. So therefore, it's kind of, I've got an idea, I'm going to throw some money at it, I'm going to throw some people at it, and we're going to hope, right? Whereas you wouldn't do that with any other endeavour, would you? If you were opening an automotive manufacturing business, if you were opening a chemicals plant, you would plan, you would sketch everything out, you would exactly work out the specifications of who you needed, where, why, when, etc., wouldn't you? And then, and only when you were ready, would you actually start building and then open the doors and start production. But we don't do that in hospitality. We just kind of go, well, we'll get some crockery and we'll get some chefs and we'll get some food in. And have you costed the menu? Ooh, no. It'd be all right, won't it? Lobster, 25 quid, sounds about right. Great, brilliant. Go. You know? So you just sort of, there's this rush, hell for leather, to just get the doors open and start serving and it'll be all right, okay? But it's not all right, because you've got to treat these things with respect. You've got to treat it with professionalism. And that, those are the two things to my mind: respect for the industry and professionalism.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine it was a core subject at school or something like that. It's got to be sort of knitted in early. I completely agree with that. And a lot of the stuff you're talking about as well, where it's like that urgent, 3 deadlines a day, completely reactive.
Just get it done. Just go. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think you touched on it for a second, where a bit earlier when we were talking about getting the system set up right and everything being meticulous and being very, very well prepared. But moving a hospitality organisation from being reactive to proactive. I mean, what about the initiatives? Because I know you do that stuff. That is your bread and butter.
Yeah.
So things that you could share around that topic.
Well, I mean, to give a real example. Again, it kind of comes from the top. There needs to be a recognition that in order to do this and do this right, you need to plan ahead, you need to prepare, you need to have things actually stitched together correctly. And we have a mutual customer who is a perfect example of this. This is a London-based business where they have involvement from some very high-quality people who have recognised that in order to succeed, they have to get the fundamentals right. They've got sites lined up for 2023, and they've said, no, we will not open any sites until we get all the systems right, which is hugely enlightened. And as a result, I have no doubt that they will succeed, and they will roll out, and they will open effectively. Whereas a lot of businesses that I've seen, they just go into the opening and they do it, and they just sort of hope, and the recruitment is done at the last minute, and therefore it's never quite right. You don't get the right people. The training is done sort of ad hoc on the job, and so it's never quite finished. And then you throw open the doors, and surprise, surprise, the product ain't right. The consistency isn't there. Customers come in expecting something brilliant and end up being deflated because it's a bit rubbish. And everyone goes, oh, well, we'll get better. Whereas actually, if you plan it and you do it right before you open the doors, then you have a chance to actually start generating profit far, far sooner. And it's this kind of virtuous cycle. So what does good look like? I think you've got to have a really clear vision of exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish, because that way you can actually determine the job specs of the people. And I know I keep on whittering on about recruitment and people and training, but it's the starting point. If you want to create an amazing experience, you need the best possible people. And in order to do that, recruitment is going to take a really long time, because the really best people they're not just there. You can't just say, oh, we'll start recruiting a week before opening, because that ain't going to work. You've got to start 3 months minimum before you open those doors. And you've got to be willing to kiss a lot of frogs before you actually get the best people. But then, actually, if you do that from the get-go, you will generate fabulous loyalty. You'll create a fabulous guest experience, and all of a sudden you've got something quite special. So I'd always kick it off there. You spend your time and you do the recruitment yourself. You don't outsource it. You don't. And I have friends in recruitment agencies who will hate me for saying this, but I don't like using recruitment agencies for this, because for me, the loyalty between me and a member of my team starts at the interview process. It starts when I reply to their CV. It's that process. It's an opportunity to begin the journey, begin the relationship. So you do it yourself. So you start that off. You have a clear vision of exactly what you're trying to achieve. And then you get the best in class systems all nicely integrated, not because I'm a tech geek, but because if you can do that, then you free up those brilliant staff to love their customers. Because I don't employ an assistant manager, a deputy manager, a brilliant barista, brilliant waiter or whatever, so that they can be there hunched over a computer in the corner, desperately trying to work out how to cash up at the end of the night, or how to work the booking system or whatever. So you want it to be seamless, so that these brilliant chefs and brilliant staff out front can just provide amazing experiences, don't you? They shouldn't be bogged down in administration. So that's what the tech should do. It just should make everything smooth and seamless and flawless, and almost completely unintrusive. The tech should just be there in the background, doing everything beautifully, so that out front, all we're focusing on is a fabulous guest experience. That's that.
Absolutely, and that completely resonates with everything that we're all about. I think it's freeing up people's time to do what they do best or what they love, and at an operational level, that there is no time for doing the admin or this.
Especially now, right?
Absolutely.
There's no spare time in the day or the week anymore, so you've got to be slick.
100%. And then if that does go wrong, and just talking about that, where there is a fundamental attitude. You spoke about it at the start about the screw loose, but in the hospitality sector, where if we're a member of staff down, I'm as a waiter, I'm going to get straight into the pot wash and just do it because it's got to be done, and everything's got to get done. And that same attitude can reflect on process as well, and making sure your processes are right.
Absolutely, but I think that's an interesting point as well, because I think the other thing that I have seen in scaling businesses is that attitude of it's all hands together. A great general manager will be able to make great coffee, serve a beautiful bottle of wine, help out in the kitchen, jump on pot wash, etc., etc., etc. Right? You're an incredible multitasking being as a GM, and that's a brilliant thing. But then often I've observed that you get, particularly when a business has grown at senior levels, you get these guys drafted in from retail or from just big corporate environments, because I think there's this weird thing where you get a business where you recruit purely on the basis of passion and attitude. So you get these amazing people, and then you get to a certain level of success, and suddenly there's a sort of combined, we're quite big now. We need people from corporate experience and big business backgrounds. That's what we need. It's like, sorry, at what point did recruiting people purely on the basis of attitude, passion, and love of what you do, and love and commitment to your vision, suddenly change to, we just need corporate people? But you see it all the time. And I think it's really dangerous, because then you end up with people at the senior level who don't understand the detail, who haven't given it all, who won't jump on pot wash when they walk into a business that is struggling. And all of a sudden the heart goes out of that enterprise, because the guys who are doing the work, there's no respect for the guys who don't understand what they do and haven't proven themselves to be willing and able to do it. And again, I think that comes down to a sort of respect, because even though those of us who've done it respect the people who do it mightily because we've been there, right? The guys who have not done it but have then somehow wangled themselves into a position of seniority, they just see those guys as like a resource to be used. There isn't that respect. So that whole denigration and disrespect that I think is so endemic and damning to the industry as a whole even comes from within the industry itself. And I think it's really dangerous. And again, it comes down to, we need to recognise the value of understanding the detail, of understanding all of the nuts and bolts and treating every area of the business with respect.
That's so well articulated. I think the empathy piece is massive as well. And when it comes to that scale, I think, because that's a sort of systemic issue.
Yeah.
And if people at site level, I mean, if they've got the systems right or they've got the process right, the importance of training as well, because of circumventing process, because I need to get it done. I need to be making whatever it is for however many people. And then that can be a hindrance to scalability, of course, because then suddenly the information for the people who are working in the central roles, who are overseeing the number of sites, they might start to get a slight disconnect. But it's that core understanding of the respect and knowing what it's all about, and being able to roll your sleeves up. It's just so important.
Yeah. And again, and I think you get, because it's so hands-on and the whole just do it thing that you were talking about, it has encouraged a style of leadership in certain areas where there is a certain type of person that can often achieve seniority in hospitality, not by technical expertise or by education, but by ability to run around shouting. And you get some very shouty people who just run around going, rah, we've got to get this done, we've got to get it done, And there is then a certain type of exec in a leadership position who likes that sort of a person, because as far as they're concerned, they are a go-getter. They don't suffer any fools. They don't take any prisoners. They get stuff done. They don't really. They just run around making noise and often actually losing you staff, because people don't want to work for people like that. But as long as that sort of noisy, bullying, arrogant, sometimes too ruthless behaviour is tolerated and indeed encouraged, I think, again, you're going to see real problems with the industry, because that's not respectful. That's not respecting the people or the detail or the abilities. It's just running around bullying and shouting. But you see it quite a lot, and I think it's more in hospitality than in other industries. And I think as long as you continue to celebrate people like that rather than celebrating experts, people who are really, really technically capable. And again, I think there has been, because hospitality can be a bit of a macho environment, because it can be, I mean, I remember when I was an assistant manager, deputy manager, general manager, we were working 90, 100 hours a week. And it was like, if you complained or if you couldn't hack it, you were weak, right? And it was just expected. Everyone did that, or at least at a certain level, everyone did that. And I think a lot of the people in leadership and hospitality still, in their hearts and hearts, kind of still believe that that's if you can't do that, you're kind of a bit weak. Whereas you've got this intake coming in who are like, no, I don't want to work 90 hours a week. I don't want to work 50 hours a week. I'm going to do 40, thank you very much, because I've got a young family, or actually I have a life. So you got that kind of disconnect, and I think again it's attitudinal, and we have to make a shift in the industry of just being a bit more professional and just not accepting that it's this kind of harsh macho environment anymore. That's not acceptable. It's not the right way to do business.
Yeah, and that is really interesting. I mean, with the millennials and Gen Z coming through and their sort of maybe slightly different core values or ways of operating, I mean, much more of an information sharing generation. So how do you see that evolving in that hospitality environment?
Well, I think that's interesting, because you've got a whole cohort of people coming through who have effectively had their mindset and the way in which they learn and the way in which they interact defined by completely new forms of technology. And that has an impact on the way in which they interact with each other and with guests. It has an impact on the way they learn. And I think, therefore, we in the technology industry need to be making sure that far more we are making sure that all of the resources, tools, systems, and particularly learning and development content and platforms are actually, first and foremost, app first, so that it's intuitive, and secondly, actually created in such a way where it's not a 90-minute course that you have to sit down and watch video after video and then go yes or no or go to, because people don't work like that anymore. It's got to be bite-sized, it's got to be broken down, it's got to be intuitive. There's got to be an element of engaging with your peer group, with your community. There's got to be social interaction. And I think it requires a complete reassessment as an industry of the way in which we present information, training, resources and tools, because that's the way it's going, right? And if we can fight it all we like, but then we will fail. So we've got to embrace it. And yeah, okay, there are some who say, well, you know what, the social media stuff, that's becoming a bit toxic. Sure, but the platform, what is the interface, what is familiar, what is indeed expected, that ain't going away. So I think we've got to gradually move towards that way of engaging with stuff. And I suspect as a result, you'll see a lot of platforms, whether it be your payroll, whether it be any place where a member of staff has to engage with a system, I suspect more and more it's going to have to be, it's on your phone, and it's following the same sort of continuous scroll sort of format as a Facebook, as a WhatsApp, because that's what they're going to expect.
I think moving, because there's a difference between onboarding and an induction in terms of the onboarding is that sit down, 90-minute course or whatever you call it, versus the learn by doing and being around the people and actually doing that. So that's going to become a much more integrated process.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we also need to be offering more, because if we want to attract and retain the best people in hospitality, we need to be offering them a little bit more than just, we're going to teach you how to make a cup of coffee or carry 3 plates or make a hollandaise sauce. I think we need to be giving them more in the way of career-enhancing skills, which means going a bit above and beyond. And if that means that actually we reassess what we view as being the necessary skills in order to do our job really well, nowhere in hospitality am I seeing people taught really how to engage or interact with people. Right, but that's what the job is, isn't it? But we don't teach that. You recruit on the basis of your ability to interact, but then we're not really giving people the skills. We just say, this is how you handle a complaint. Please remember to upsell when you offer a main course or whatever. But we're not really teaching people how to do that. Whereas actually, I think if we can be a bit more proactive in giving people these career-enhancing skills, like how you engage, how you cultivate relationships, how you actually persuade people. These are then skills which I can use if I'm selling a technology service, or I could go and get a job as an estate agent, or maybe I could stay in hospitality because they're investing in me and I could just become absolutely amazing in that sector because I now know everything. I think we're going to see a bit more of a need to move the dial in terms of that sort of training and development piece there.
Yeah, and seeing the progression path. I think one of the things that can be a turn-off to people joining the sector, and there's been massive, big initiatives that have been put in place to attract more people to hospitality. But is that thing of, I'm the waiter, but I can see the GM, but that's many years off to get to that position. And being able to lay the framework, you're right, and find the path to get there.
Yeah.
And the cross-training. And
I think there's some missed opportunities, because, we've got the apprenticeship levy that we're all paying into, but it's not really used. People aren't actually, the whole idea of that is you're supposed to then be able to use that funds to pay for apprenticeships. But people aren't really, or at least I'm not seeing people doing that properly, because it's seen as a lot of box ticking, but it's not actually that much practical value. And then, people did go to the polytechnics, and they'd learn, you do your HNDs and all the rest of it, and you'd learn, or you go to catering college and things like that. But actually, again, that I think that was seen by many as, well, okay, that means I can fold a napkin. Is that really that relevant? It's not really, actually. Whereas I'd really love to see, as an industry, us defining the educational pathways that we are putting in place to bring through the bright people, and making it much more about the soft skills, making it much more about, teach them economics, teach them how to manage a P&L, teach them how to cost a recipe, teach them all that stuff. Because I see time and time again people who can fold a flipping napkin, but they can't cost a recipe, or they can't work out how to calculate VAT. And this is the basics. So actually, if as an industry we could craft these educational pathways ourselves a little bit and say, well, this is what we need, this is what we value, and create some really good vocational training, I think that could go quite a long way. And then actually maybe we could use some of that funding that's all sat there doing very little that we're all contributing to.
Yeah, it's powerful, definitely. I completely agree. I think looking at the... just taking a step back now and looking more at the kind of some of the challenges that the operational challenges that they face, legislation.
Yeah.
So the legislation that's come through, I think the first question is things like the calorie and the labelling and all these things, which are real operational challenges. But what are your thoughts on these at present?
So it's such a mixed bag. You take the overall priority, which is we are facing an obesity crisis in the United Kingdom. That is beyond a doubt. And it's costing the NHS and care services a fortune. My wife is a surgeon, and they have to make so many commitments and spend so much on reinforced structures and beds and specialist scanning equipment because of obesity. It's a major, major thing, and you see it at all ages now. School children at primary school. It's a major, major problem. So I get why there is a stated priority within government and in terms of legislative focus. But then you look at things like this calorie labelling and you think, that's a really blunt tool, and it's not really been thought through to my mind, because actually when you go out to a restaurant, it's a pleasure experience, right? You're not going there just to consume nutrients. You're not going there with the sole purpose of putting fuel in your body. You're going there because it's pleasurable. We can just grab a bowl of porridge at home if we wanted just to consume nutrients, but we're going there because it's an experience. And having the calories, quite apart from it being a total pain in the neck for the operator, and it's massive, because I don't think people have worked out just how hard it is to do it accurately. Customers don't want to see it. They don't want that whole, I'm really looking forward to, that's 1,200 calories. It's a joy-sapping thing. So I think that was ill-conceived, to be honest. And then the burden that places, and I know it's only on the businesses that have got more than 250 employees, and therefore it's the bigger operators. But even for them, it's not joined up, because in order to do that, we've got to get the calorific information from the suppliers and the manufacturers. They don't hold that data in an easy to disseminate or consume form. So it means you get, if you're lucky, the specification sheets from the manufacturers and the producers. And then you've got to sift through it all and load it all into the system. And it's a nightmare. And I can't really honestly see that the HOs are going around the business going, no, this is 700 calories and you've said it's 600, so you're close. Do you know what I mean? It's not in anyone's interest, is it? But then on the other hand, pieces of legislation that have been brought through recently, like the legislation for foods high in fat, sugar and salts, which I looked at and thought, yeah, that makes sense. That's quite enlightened. Seems to have completely gone by the wayside. No one's talking about it.
HFSS.
HFSS, yeah. So this is the legislation which the stated aim was basically to take foods which are high in fats, sugars and salts, sweeties, crisps, biscuits, things like that, and effectively to control the way in which they are advertised and located in order to protect the members of society that are most vulnerable to effectively impulse purchasing. So basically sticking bags of sweets in front of kids at supermarket checkouts, advertising sweeties and things like that associated with a Disney character on primetime TV, all that sort of stuff. And you look at that, and I don't think anyone, certainly those of us with children, wouldn't look at that and say, that is a brilliant idea, absolutely. But it's just sort of, I don't think anyone's heard of it. And the first part of it went, I think, technically live last October. And then the rest of it's been delayed, and there were a load of whispers that the food manufacturing lobbies have got stuck in, and you can imagine the likes of Kraft Foods and Nestle going, not happy about this. Go on, throw some money at the relevant parties, and let's get this delayed, please, because it's not in their interest, and it's probably not in the interests of the large retailers like the supermarkets, because they're going to see a dip in impulse purchasing. And we're on the verge of a recession, and we all know, or at least those of us who used to work at Cadbury Schweppes know, that in a recession, the one thing that does really well is confectionery, because it's the little treat that's affordable. But this legislation, no one seems to have heard about it. And I certainly haven't seen any change in the way in which these things are sold at supermarkets and all the rest of it. So I just find it a little bit odd that we've got this big picture thing about calorie labelling, which everyone in the industry agrees is a total nightmare to administer, maintain, and nobody wants it anyway. But then on the other hand, you've got a piece of legislation coming through that actually those of us who've heard about it and have thought about it have said, yeah, that's quite enlightened actually, that's quite sensible. And it just seems to have, I don't know, just passed completely unnoticed, which is weird, isn't it? So yeah,
where just for any of our listeners, but where's the best place to consume information, or the single version of the truth, to stay ahead of these things?
It's really tricky, and that's part of the problem, I think, because of course the FSA and the environmental health officers at a local level and local authorities, they're all quite underfunded and understaffed as a result. So, but one of my businesses, I've up until relatively recently had a food manufacturing business, so we are FSA registered, of course. We've never received any information through email or through post about impending changes in legislation, as far as, unless my chefs are hiding things from me, which I don't think they are, we don't get it through there. So it's a really interesting question. I knew about the HFSS stuff because someone approached me to write an article about it, and I get invited to comment on things from time to time through, PR people. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't have heard about it actually. So it's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. And I think maybe businesses like yours and mine probably need to be the ones who are staying abreast of this stuff and then letting our customers know, because I don't think it's coming from other sources actually, and because what we do get is we get, the government says, well, this bit of legislation is coming up, but at no point is there really any guidance or support as to how on earth you're going to implement that. So I think it falls on the likes of us to say, this is what's happening, but don't worry, it's not as bad as it sounds, or maybe it is as bad as it sounds, but here's how we can support you to actually implement it and protect yourself from it. Because the problem is, by and large, the only people you hear it from are if you employ a bunch of health and safety auditors, which a lot of us in the industry do. But of course, they're going to say, you've got to implement this to the fullest extent of exactly what it says, because they've got themselves to protect as well, right? Which is perfectly reasonable. I don't blame them for it. But therefore, you've got no one in the middle saying, yeah, actually, this is what it says, but you know what? You can probably, there's a bit of latitude there, and this is, we think how it's intended to be implemented, and this is how it's likely to be enforced. And I think there's a bit of a gap there, actually. So maybe you should start a podcast about it.
Yeah, exactly. Bang on. No, I genuinely would love to have a separate discussion with you around legislation, and as and when things happen, I think that'd be a really good platform for it. The impact of these legislations, I mean, talking firsthand, having seen it and experienced it, is sorry. Having seen firsthand and actually experienced it with these legislations, with this legislation and the hidden cost to a company to implement it. So things like whether it's Natasha's Law or the nutritional guidelines and labelling on menus, it's quite profound when having to capture all that information, as you say, administer that, get it into a format to then present it back. And time again, there's a deadline to achieve this. And then it's and there might be sufficient time. I mean, seeing it with GDPR as well back in, was it 2018, where suddenly it's like, oh God, we've got to do this. It's a week away, even though there's been there's been a year in the works or whatever it is. And I think it kind of goes back to those things we're talking about, where it's the if we could get, making sure we're on the front foot, making sure we're proactive about the operation.
Absolutely. And also, because if you remember GDPR, then that created a whole industry and people offering to help you with your GDPR stuff. And it's this whole new revenue stream for all of these slightly unscrupulous operations. I think, again, we need to protect ourselves so that we are really aware of the truth of what's actually going on here, so that we can properly protect ourselves, aren't we? So that we're not held to ransom by these opportunistic types.
Definitely. And the other thing, just to add on the nutritional bit, because I would love to have a separate session about legislation, but the gripe is, as more research and understanding is, things like people, Tim Spector, who's the gut doctor, he's sort of doing the proper...
The Zoe guy,
the Zoe guy,
which is brilliant. And I don't know if you've read his book, which is fabulous. And of course he makes the point that the calorie is a completely nonsensical unit of measure, because that's not how our body consumes energy from food. It's the metric of how does a piece of food burn in a weird tiny little oven. Your body doesn't eat like that, oddly enough. So a calorie is basically pointless as a unit of measure. But that's not a very popular sentiment. But again, you'd think that the people in government, or in Public Health England, or whatever agency it is that's driving these things, would think, maybe this doesn't work, because actually the human body doesn't have an oven and isn't setting fire to whatever it's eating. But
absolutely, I think that's where we are facilitating that to protect the operators, to make sure.
But it's also disguising, I think, what is a more deadly issue, which is the issue of hyper-processed foods. So, and again, if you read... it was Spoon-Fed, his book, wasn't it? Which I found fascinating. And the point he makes, which is something that I've instinctively believed for a long time, is that the issue is not the presence of, in a basic level, fat or protein or carbohydrates, because the body needs those things, right? But actually the body doesn't need highly processed artificial products. And it's like, you look at the sugar tax, for instance. Sugar tax comes in, and what do people do? Well, they're not willing to make their product taste less sweet, because otherwise people won't buy it. So they reduce the amount of sugar in it and then fill it full of artificial sweeteners, which have dubious health impact anyway, and then gets people more hooked on something which is even sweeter tasting, but is less satisfying, because that's what artificial sweeteners do. They don't satisfy you in the way that sugar does. So actually, it creates even more of a craving sensation for these products. So again, it's kind of a bit, I don't know, but it's as if people have gone, yeah, that's a great idea, with not real much consideration of the consequences, which is a bit dangerous to me.
It is dangerous, and remaining compliant in that is a challenge, and it's just, and there's lots of hidden costs from that. So thinking about next wave of legislation, sustainability, are you seeing much in that?
Well, we were, and still are in certain quarters, and we were getting. There was, of course, a lot of moves around food miles and around seasonality, and that was becoming kind of the new mantra, and about provenance. And that was great. And I was doing work with a lot of people on how to bring that out on your menus, how to actually tell the story behind your food, because there's a lot of places where they're actually doing really great things in terms of provenance, sustainability, and seasonality, but they're not really talking about it. So actually, how do you bring that story to life for your guests so that they can appreciate it and understand that when making a choice about venue? I think that's become a lot harder because of, unfortunately, the pressures that the industry are under. Costs and so on makes people take, well, the choices are harder, aren't they? I think the other part of it is that people realise that the whole food miles thing was a little bit of a simplification, and that it's all very well saying, I want to use things that have been produced in a 30-mile radius from my business. But if I'm having to use an artificially heated greenhouse or polytunnel to grow strawberries, when I could just buy them from Spain where they grow because they have lots of sunshine, that might actually not be the best thing for the environment or carbon footprint. So I think people are taking a bit more of a nuanced approach. The The other thing that I think is fascinating at the moment, and we've only started to see the beginning of it, is in terms of technology and sustainability and traceability. IBM have been recently doing some really interesting work in terms of the traceability of products, so that they're developing a system whereby you can actually scan a code on a avocado, and that will show you to a tiny little grid reference exactly what tree that came from. Do you know what I mean? So from a traceability perspective, and therefore sustainability, transparency, and understanding about supply chain, that's really powerful. And using tech to ensure that we know exactly that when we're tucking into an organic chicken, it really is exactly what it claims to be. I think that's really powerful, actually. And I think the next evolution, tracking back to the challenges around calorie legislation, for instance, the challenge around calorie legislation is the quality of information that we receive from suppliers, manufacturers, etc., is inconsistent. It's not held in the same way. It's not compiled in the same way. It's all using different formats. But we've got, things like the GS1 standards. We've got companies like Eridus endeavouring to create industry standard databases. If we can loop all that together using systems like yours, systems like Eridus, systems like IBM, so that you've got a complete end-to-end solution, so that then as an operator, I can just tap into that, and it's all there in the same standard format and in a trustworthy format. Because time and time again, I'm working on a project at the moment for a customer, and we're saying to suppliers, can you supply us the allergen information? And then they're going, oh yeah, there's none in that, and there's some in that. Can you send us the specifications, please? Oh, we don't have that. Okay, I can't trust your information then at all. I'm probably going to have to look for a different supplier. Do you understand that? Oh, well, we've never been asked for this before. Well, you probably should have been in that case. So I think that's probably where we're going to see quite a bit of evolution in terms of technology in supply chain and that sort of thing, because I think it's absolutely essential, because otherwise everything just gets too hard, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And there are some great innovations coming through in that. In terms of wider innovations in the sector, what do you think, or what are your predictions for things that are going to come through? It's a broad question, that.
It is a broad question. Yeah. I think where I see a gap, and this isn't particularly helpful to you and your business at all, so apologies, is in food manufacturing, actually, and in and food service supply, because we're seeing huge skills shortages. We're seeing shortages in terms of skilled people. So it's a skills shortage, it's a people shortage, but we've still got the same desire and need from the guests. Now, there is a way of managing that, which is by creating innovative product development, recipe development, menu development. So you create great looking, great tasting menus with lovely dishes, with great quality products, but where you're using specialist manufacturers to take the brunt of the work. So you're using, for instance, high-end sous vide manufacturers to provide you with beautiful sous vide and char-grilled chicken breast, for instance. And you're using companies to do you lovely blanched roasted sweet potato cubes and things like that. So that if you can't afford the amount of labour, or if you don't have the skill or whatever, you can still assemble great plates of food by making different purchasing decisions. And if I was in food service, or if I was in food manufacture still, which thank goodness I'm not, I would be looking to create a curated range of foundational building block products. So you've got centre of plate proteins, you've got accompaniments in terms of vegetables, grains, pulses, etc., that have all been pre-staged, pre-cooked to a really high calibre, so that as an operator, I can then assemble those in different ways. I've got a versatile range of products that can then be used to create lots of different dishes, starters, mains, desserts, all that range. So I can have a small ingredient basket, a small prep list, but still have a nice, varied, enticing menu, and still be using fresh quality products. Because there is a perception that these pre-done things are less good, but actually, why should they be less good? That's not logical. If I've got a highly skilled specialist sous vide company doing my proteins, why is that going to be less good than matey boy who's been learning to cook for 6 months, cooking it in the kitchen. That's not logical. But I think, again, there is a disdain, particularly amongst the older school chefs, for anything that doesn't involve them doing everything from scratch. And I get that to a degree, but I think we need to become a little bit more enlightened and a little bit more accepting that the world has changed, and that actually maybe the skilled chef uses their culinary creativity to build beautiful, carefully crafted menus and recipes, but where they're not cooking everything from scratch. They're not making the veal jus themselves every service, but they're buying it, or they're working with a manufacturer where they're having it made to their specification. So they've still got control, they've still got creative influence, but it's being done in a much more consistent manner where there's zero wastage, there's zero prep time, the labour requirement is much less. I think that's probably where we will necessarily see quite a lot of innovation over the next few years, because I think it's necessary, to be honest.
That's a really good view of what's going to come through. So, I mean, what advice would you give to small and medium businesses to differentiate themselves?
I think the focus always needs to be the hospitality experience. And I see time and time again people getting hung up on the crockery or the decor or the twiddly bits, the garnish. Whereas actually, that's not what people don't come for, the garnish or how beautiful the cutlery is. They come because of the way you make them feel. And that is fundamentally, that's the hospitality experience. Yes, of course, you've got to deliver a great plate of food or a great pint. But fundamentally, the person that's between the plate of food and the guest is the point of difference, I believe. I will personally always go back to a business where that's the point of difference and you get a great welcome and people seem to genuinely care about you. I think it needs to be authentic, it needs to be sympathetic, it needs to be heartfelt. These are the things that are so hard to recruit and train, but if you get it right, will result in amazing levels of repeat custom and loyalty and all that good stuff. And I've had some fabulous experiences around the world in a building in a corrugated iron shed with wonderful hospitality and really lovely food. The setting is not as important as the experience that is provided by the people. That's where I would put all of my focus, to be honest, because I think it's so often not as good as it could be in this country.
That makes me think of a place that we used to go to Portugal, and there's a place called the Chicken Shack. It's actually called Marufo's, but it's been labelled the Chicken Shack, and it is so cheap and cheerful, chicken and chips, but done ridiculously well. And it's always heaving all year round. Whatever happens, it's incredible. And that's key. Would love to try something a bit different. So have you ever heard of start, stop, continue? So start,
what would you start? What would you stop? Exactly. What would you continue?
Yeah. So just a general, for people that you work with, or for the what in the sector. I mean, what would you start, stop, continue?
I think start looking at technology as an ally and not a weird foe to be suspicious of, because I think there is a degree of that within the industry. I think we just need to embrace it, but also not make it a fetish, not make it a obsession with gadgety things, because so often that's what you see. You see people going one way or the other. They're either suspicious or they go, we want everything. And that's too far, actually, as well. It needs to be fit for purpose. You need to remember what you're trying to achieve. So I'd start making tech your friend and putting it there to make everything automated. Anything that you're doing again and again and again, anything repetitive, automate it. Recruit great staff. Don't make them do the boring admin. Automate it. Use tech to just take all that stuff away. Stop tolerating toxic leaders. Stop tolerating people who are actually not experts. They're not necessarily the best leaders in terms of generating loyalty or creating wonderful working environments. Stop tolerating shouty bullying types in the industry. Stick to your guns. Recruit based on passion and attitude. And don't tolerate anything other than perfection in terms of recruitment. Don't recruit quickly. It's the old thing: recruit slow, fire fast, get rid of any toxic elements, because everywhere I go, I see that being the death knell of good businesses. It's usually one or two people who kind of shouldn't be there, and it ruins it for the rest of the people who are really, really good. And then continue. It's an awesome industry, right? There are so many brilliant things about it, and it can fill you with fire and passion. So continue that, bring all of that good things out, accentuate that, make it about love of food, love of interaction, love of service, love of people, celebrate that, respect that, professionalize that, and continue that journey, because it's an amazing industry, and it's one that I've loved for pretty much, well, not pretty much, all of my adult life, and will continue to do so. I just love it if the government, the economy, and various people around us would make it easier for us rather than harder.
And just stepping to the other side of the bar, and as a customer, we've covered this in some ways through the discussion, but what do you feel like the restaurants or pubs or wherever you go, what do you feel like they don't get right?
Paying for the flipping bill, right? It drives me witless, and it's time and time again. If a customer has decided that they want to pay, they want to leave, do not make them wait. There are so many businesses, even really good ones, where the welcome's great, the service is great, the food's great, the hospitality's great, and then you've decided you want to pay, and you sit there trying to get someone's attention because suddenly everyone's vanished because it's the end of service, the end of the shift, people are wrapping cutlery or polishing glasses, you can't get anyone's attention, and by that point you're gone, you've checked out, haven't you? You're thinking about the next thing you're doing, you want to go home, you want to go for a walk, whatever it is. You've moved on. Make it easy. Get the bill down as soon as possible, because they're not ordering puddings. Don't make them hold out for that. If they decide they don't, just get the bill paid and let them get out. And that's my big bugbear, to be honest, because I see it all the time, and it's irritating because it's completely avoidable.
Definitely. And what would be a key learning that you pass on to your younger self starting out?
Aside from choosing brilliant quality shoes and socks for 17-hour shifts, I would say, because that's important, I would say to myself, and this is specific to me, probably be bolder with your decisions, because of the way in which I was brought up to a degree, I made quite safe choices in my teenage years in terms of what subjects I chose, what I did at university, what A-levels, what GCSEs even I did. And I did history and English literature because I was good at it and it came easy, because I have this weird ability in that I can read a book and then regurgitate it at will. Very irritating to other children in my classes. But it meant that I did what came easy and therefore didn't challenge me. And therefore I was good at it and it came naturally, but I wasn't really passionate about it. When I was 7, I wanted to be a game warden in Nepal looking after snow leopards. One of the only regrets I have in my life is that I didn't actually do anything towards that, And I know that sounds silly, but like as a broad point, there are some amazing subjects out there, like philosophy, like economics. I actually think if I'd had my time again, I might have really liked to have done PPE, because actually those 3 subjects, philosophy, politics, economics, I think I'd have found fascinating. I think I'd have really enjoyed it. But instead I did history, which I've always been really good at, and therefore treated with disdain, and didn't try very hard, if I'm totally honest, because it was easy for me. So I think I would say be bolder, make bolder decisions, challenge yourself, do what you're passionate about rather than what comes easily, and because I think if you find yourself doing what brings you joy, everything else just follows. The boring stuff like the success and the money follows, but you're doing what you love. That's key.
That is sage advice. And what's next for you and for Tweakd?
At the moment, we are, like anyone who has any involvement with the hospitality industry, we're kind of looking at things going, it's all a little bit tricky at the moment. And where operators are struggling with the bills and wondering if they're going to actually be able to ride it out for the next quarter, that therefore has an impact on us. What we're trying to do is create easy, simple, off-the-shelf products and services where people can look at it and say, that's a no-brainer. Yep, I want that, because I can see that in 3 months' time I'll make return on investment, and that's going to meaningfully make my life a lot easier, because it's not easy to make a case for any operator at the moment to part with their money when they've got so little of it. So what we're trying to do is demonstrate ways in which we can really, really save money, improve your profits, make everything go a little bit further. Because it is possible. It's kind of how you sculpt that and how you position it, isn't it? So that's what we're doing at the moment, and focusing less on the really big projects and more lots of little wins. How we can move the dial a little bit for businesses so that they can go from making a loss to breaking even, making a bit of a profit, kind of getting through the next 6 months, really.
That's a perfect place to close. I think, Alex, thank you so much for coming on, and an incredible discussion and insight, and really appreciate it. I can't wait to get you back on here.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Alex. Now, if you have feedback or feel you have insights to share on the podcast, contact me directly at ollie.brand@zupa.com. Otherwise, don't hesitate to share and hit subscribe on whichever channel you're using to listen to or watch this podcast. This has been Recipes for Success by Zupa. Until next time.